All right, I'm so sorry. We haven't done an Onnit Total Human Optimization podcast in a very long time. We've been very busy here. Aubrey has been off doing Aubrey things, but we're gonna try to come back and finish the year strong. We have some really great episodes lined up for you, and today we're gonna talk about something that all of us could learn something from. We're talking with Cameron Josse of DeFranco's gym at the Onnit Academy here in Austin. And we're going to talk about training like an athlete because a lot of us, we have our own plans. We work out with different trainers and, we try to do our own things that, a lot of us plateau and a lot of us don't go past a certain point. But when you think about athletes, they're the best in shape people in the entire world. So what are they doing that's different from us? Like, what's going on? Obviously, they have the genes to be able to pull off these things. I'm not going to be playing lineman for the NFL anytime soon. But what's the difference? Get us on the right track here. What are you doing with your athletes?
What am I doing with my athletes? Well, when you're training an athlete, you have to first look at, and really anybody in general, you have to look at what are they training for, So you get them in the facility, and it's one of the first things you say is, what's your goal? Right? Everything's got to start with a goal. That's something that we do at DeFranco's all the time, no matter if it's a general population person, an athlete, or whoever it might be. We just want to know what's the goal and how do you want to get there? What's the end game with all of the programming and all of that? So really, from that standpoint, there's not a huge difference between someone that technically is an athlete or somebody that isn't an athlete, all right? Because everybody just has a goal that you're trying to reach. So if you're somebody that wants to lose fat, right, you have a goal. If you're somebody that wants to make the team in football as a walk-on for college football, that's your goal, all right? So everybody's got a goal, and you just got to make sure that you are able to provide for them to get to that goal. So the main difference is that the athletes are generally very regimented, and that's kind of ingrained in their brain from whenever they start playing their sport, and that's how they expect to succeed, is that they have to be very regimented. And that's something that athletes are constantly preached, is that they need to be regimented and systematic, whereas a lot of general population people are still grasping that concept of being regimented, having a system in place, and knowing that things take time to develop and that you have to be consistent and stick to something, and that's how you develop, whether your goal is to be an athlete or just get in better shape as a general human being.
Yeah, but one thing I would think is, like, if I was a professional athlete, my house, my family depend on me being strong, fast, whatever the sport is I'm doing.
Sure.
So they have that extra drive.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything other than just, I look better in my swim trunks, or I look better in my bikini, like the normal people can just drive for? I mean,
well, there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, if you're an athlete, there's going to be intrinsic motivational factors, and then there's also going to be extrinsic motivational factors as well. And the same thing goes for general population people. So a lot of athletes, you talk about, are you in it for the money or in it for the love of the game? So money is something that's an external factor. It's extrinsically motivating. Something like really just loving the sport that you play is intrinsically motivating. So for athletes, it kind of goes both ways as well. A lot of them, they understand that they have to provide for their families. Some of them love the game. Some of them just love the money, or they're just doing it for attention. There's a lot of psychological factors that go into it as well. And the general population people, it's sort of the same thing, where some people genuinely just want to get better. They decide one day, hey, you know what? I'm tired of what I look like, or I'm tired of how I feel. I'm always in pain, or I just want to be able to do this. I want to dunk a basketball or something like that.
Cameron, I want to dunk a basketball.
Well, let's get to work then, right? So there's a lot of factors that go into it, and no matter who you're dealing with, there's a lot of different what's referred to as psychological temperaments. So you're just dealing with a lot of different people, whether or not they are athletes. I have plenty of athletes that are less motivated than some of my general population people, and obviously vice versa as well. So there's definitely, it's kind of a complicated answer from that standpoint.
Yeah. So you run the combine program here. Obviously, the DeFranco's combine program is world renowned. Everybody knows Brian Cushing came out of it, as well as a lot of other NFL athletes. I think you recently worked with Sendejo for the Vikings.
Andrew Sendejo, yeah.
So in that mindset part of things, these young college kids are just out of college and they have this potential NFL career. from them, psychological wise, like what are you seeing from them in their drive? Because they haven't been paid yet, and you know everything's in front of them. So like, what do you see from them when they come in?
Well, for the most part, you see very intrinsically motivated individuals from that standpoint, because they understand that the task at hand is very large. They're about to become professional athletes, and that they have to put in all of the work they possibly can for that small window. It's really like that 6 to 12 week period.
So their whole life is dependent on that 6 to 12 weeks.
Yes and no. I mean, there's a lot that is based upon things that they've done throughout their college career and stuff like that. So obviously the on-field presence and the film and all of that is a huge component to it. What we do is that we just try to capitalize on what they're already capable of doing. So when they come to us for training for the NFL Combine or for their NFL Pro Day, is that we have a very small window to try to capitalize on things that they're very good at. And we also try to get their bodies as healthy as they possibly can be. So we're trying to make sure that we're really taking care of them from a restorative standpoint as well as from a developmental standpoint. But going back to the original thought process is that even in that situation, you still have some people that are willing to do whatever it takes in that 6 to 12 week period, sometimes even as short as 4 weeks, in order to really put on the greatest showing that they can in front of, all 32 teams and scouts from all 32 teams, and really just trying to lay it all on the line and just have the greatest job interview of their life. And then you have others who don't quite understand the stage. Like they really come in and they think they know it, but they don't quite understand how.
Because I mean, let's be honest here. You guys had your successes, but you also have had your complete failures, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, like throughout. This is our the 18th year that really the DeFranco system has been training guys for the NFL Combine. There was a little bit of some hectic stuff with the move down to Austin and stuff like that, where there were a couple years where it wasn't as big as it was in the past, but really going on 18 years now of developing guys through that NFL Combine preparation program. And, my boss, Joe DeFranco, will certainly attest that for every great success story, there's always at least one guy that just didn't quite put the work in. And for them to come to us, obviously we aren't babysitters. Yep. We're going to give them all the tools they have, but it's really up to that individual to harness the tools that we provide them with. And we can try to convince them until we're blue in the face. But at the end of the day, if they are not intrinsically motivated enough to do it, they're not going to succeed. So that plays a huge factor into it.
Yeah. So give us a glimpse of what it's like for an athlete that's coming in for the Combine program. As we just announced that we're now taking signups for the 2016 Combine prep here at our gym in Austin. When they get here, what's the first week like for that athlete?
The first week is really a baseline assessment type of week. So the way that our assessments typically work is that we don't have one day that is like, okay, we're going to test everything in this day, and then we're going to test everything at the end and just see how it goes. We're constantly assessing every day. So they come in and we will provide some initial baseline measures such as their height, their body weight, their body composition. We will review their injury history, things like that, try to really get to know the individual. And that first week is very rudimentary. It's just something where we're just trying to see who we have and how we can go about developing them. So the first week is really just trying to take a step back from a coaching standpoint, really assess who we have, get to know what I talked about before, the psychological temperaments of each person that's in that group. And then also understand how long you're going to have them for. And from there, for that point going forward, trying to figure out, okay, how best can we develop this individual? But really the Combine program is really about just sticking to basics, really just trying to take them and not complicate things, simplify it as much as you can. So we're just working on basic movement patterns and trying to master those basic movement patterns. We have a lot of guys that come in that are masters of their sport on the field, and then you get them in the gym and they cannot do very basic general human movement patterns. So I'm not talking about football movement patterns. I'm just saying general human movement patterns. So a lot of the first couple of weeks, it's just centered around trying to develop those basic human movement patterns, how to develop just very basic sprinting mechanics, jumping mechanics, everything that goes into all the different events that they're going to be doing at the Combine.
So the whole program is based around all the challenges and events that they're going to have at the Combine. So getting them ready for the 40-yard dash. You're getting ready for I don't know I don't know all the specific scientific names for all the tests, but you're getting ready for each of those events.
Everything, yeah. So that's our approach to training, no matter who we're training.
Yeah,
is that if once we understand the goal that's in place, we're going to attack that goal from every angle in order to achieve that goal. So the NFL Combine is an extensive battery of different tests, right? So, we have the bench press test, the 40-yard dash test, vertical jump, shuttle, change of direction types of drills. And then on top of that, they have to perform positional drills within the position that they play. So that's also a huge component to it as well, is that we can prep them for those very general basic battery of tests, but then we also have to prep them within their position and make sure that they're moving well as a linebacker, as a wide receiver, or as a quarterback, whatever it might be. We have to make sure that we are developing them from what we call a general standpoint and also a specific standpoint. So the general standpoint, just sprinting, jumping, lifting, that type of stuff. And then from a specific standpoint, we have to make sure that they're moving well as what they are playing on the field.
Yeah. So you mentioned moving well a lot. I think a lot of people probably see athletes and they think they just go super hard in the gym every single day, all day. And their bodies could probably handle it, maybe. But how important is that recovery portion of the training? And I know I was reading some stuff about combine training, and myofascial release was one of the big things that's used during training. So talk a little bit more the recovery and what the balance actually is whenever you're training these athletes versus like really hard work versus just working on mobility and recovery of the muscles and everything else.
Yeah, so recovery obviously is immense. It's something that's very important to training. So there's a saying that you don't get better by what you do in the gym, you get better by what you're able to recover from in the gym. So obviously, we never want to overtrain our athletes. So their bodies, being potentially professional athletes, are certainly very capable of handling a very high stress load, but we want to make sure that we're sticking within the realms of what we refer to as the minimum effective dose of training. So it's actually a medical term, minimal effective dose, but really what we're talking about is trying to give them the bare minimum that's going to allow them to reach the point of development without overtraining their bodies and to the point where they are going to start shutting down by accumulating too much stress. So typically when we have a weekly template, we follow what's referred to as a high-low methodology. So what we do is we'll have days that are more high intensity. And when I say high intensity, I'm talking about stress physiologically and neurally. So we're talking about central nervous system stress and different high stress factors that are really going to affect the body on a global standpoint. So if something's very high intensity, we're talking about sprinting at full speed, jumping as high as you can, throwing something as far as you can, lifting as heavy as you can, those type of things. And then we have our what we refer to as low days, which are a little bit lower in terms of CNS intensity, central nervous system intensity. And that's days that we're focusing on our energy system. So we're working on our aerobic system. We're working on some lesser intense resistance training, so more auxiliary lifting, or perhaps maybe we're just focusing on upper body, because the lower body lifting will always be more intense than the upper body lifting. So 100% of your squat max will be more intense than 100% of your bench press max. So we stagger it and we play with it different ways in order to make sure that we give the athletes ample opportunity to recover between training bouts. So we're not hitting them with super high intensity stuff every day. We're making sure that we're programming days that are lower intensity. Then we have very low intensity days that are that we refer to as restorative or recovery days. And on those days, we're really just working on mobility, durability, and just overall restorative work.
Yeah. So that on the basis of recovery, because I think that's as you mentioned, I think that's where a lot of people mess up, man. And as I think about it and as I get older and do the training that I do, I think that's where a lot of people mess up, because you get into this mindset where, like, if you don't work out, you like, oh, I'm being lazy, or I'm ruining all my gains, and all that stuff. It's like for not an athlete, maybe somebody that just presses harder than your average normal person. What's kind of in your mind kind of a good schedule, like, to make sure that you're getting enough recovery?
Well, I think, and this is my personal opinion, just based on my experience as an athlete.
Obviously everybody's gonna be a little bit different, but
so based on my personal experience, I think that there's two two schools of thought here, where there are people where all they do is super high intensity stuff all the time. Obviously, that's probably not a good idea. But then I also think that there's people that are doing too much quote unquote recovery based activities where they're not doing enough high intensity stuff. So in my personal opinion, when I'm trying to program specifically for athletes, I'm trying to make sure that I'm providing the right balance of stressors, because if all you're doing is constantly recovering, you're never building. You know what I mean? You're like, what are you recovering from? You haven't done anything to really break yourself down.
Yeah.
So, and the other way around is, if you're constantly breaking yourself down and not giving yourself enough time to recover, then you can't build the building blocks needed to grow and develop. So, I think that when it comes to recovery, everybody is different, like you just said before. So everybody is a little bit different. So, the more accumulated you are to a certain form of training. So if you're more used to high intensity stuff, you'll be able to recover from that stuff fairly well. So if you're somebody, we might have a perfect example is that we had a kid that's been with us for about 6 to 8 weeks here, and he still has a long way to go in terms of quote unquote getting in shape. But then we have this guy he's a football player. And then we had a guy that came in recently. It's a rugby player. And typically you would think a rugby player is going to be in better shape than a football player, just from a capacity standpoint, because of
they're a little bit more crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And the guy that looks more out of shape was completely outperforming the guy that looked more in shape and played rugby. So everybody's different. And sometimes something for somebody is going to be super high intensity, whereas for somebody else, that's actually a low intensity thing. So if you look at, the Onnit unconventional training, for example, it's a perfect example, because for a general population person, they could go through one of those unconventional classes and really feel sore as hell the next day, right?
I felt it.
But then you could take a guy that's going into the NFL, and that would be more of a recovery workout for him.
Yeah.
So you have different people, and the stresses are different based on who you are and what you're capable of handling. And it's just all about the bodies that you're dealing with and what they're capable of doing. And it's just something that we ask ourselves every day. And it's something that I've gotten from Buddy Morris, who's the strength coach for the Arizona Cardinals right now. He always says, like, what can I do or what can't I do to enable my athletes to do what they do? And that's kind of the question that I ask my athletes as well. I kind of stole that from him, and I think it's a great thing to say and ask yourself as a coach every day, anytime you're writing programs or taking somebody through a workout.
Yeah. One thing always wanted to know is, like, the NFL athletes, because they have to practice. They have several practices a week, and then they have a game at least. They have a game at once a week, which probably just annihilates their body. But then a lot of them, they still do their own workouts to supplement even that. So I know you work with a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, like you mentioned. You have some friends with Cardinals and with the Texans as well. From your knowledge, like, how do those athletes balance that with practice and, like, their own programs and, like, playing a game? Because that's got to be a ton of stress on the body.
Yeah, it's cool because now at the professional level, there's a lot of monitoring devices that you can actually use that will give you feedback on your physiology. But even if you don't have that type of technology, really it just comes down to just paying attention to yourself if you're the athlete, or paying attention to your athletes if you're the coach. If your athlete is walking into the gym Monday after playing a Sunday NFL game, and walks into the facility on Monday and his eyes are flickering, he looks like he's about to drop dead, and looks like he's pale in the face, like, you already have to understand that you can't get a lot out of him that day. And obviously when athletes are in season, the most important stressor that they can provide for themselves in terms of elevating their performance is practice and the games. So their in-season training, so to speak, has to be very different from their off-season training, because they're playing these games. And so the most important stress that they're receiving in terms of being able to excel during the season is practice itself and playing the games themselves. So we have to make sure that those two things are operating at a very high level. So if I'm in the weight room, or if I'm a strength coach that's bringing these guys in the weight room during the season, I have to understand that I can't be selfish. I have to take everything into consideration. Everything accumulates and everything combines. So I can't assume that what I do is going to be completely isolated from what they're doing on the field. That's not the way the human body works. You have a limited amount of stress that you can handle in one day. So I want to make sure that they're able to operate at very high levels during practice, because that is the most important stimulus they can get during the season. So if I'm beating them up so much in the gym that they can't perform well at practice, their gameplay could potentially deteriorate. So that's the difference between the off season and the in season, is that in the off season, strength coaches or sports performance coaches like myself, we can be much more selfish, so to speak, where we can do whatever we really want to do and get creative with it. But during the season, we have to understand what they're doing at practice, and we just have to supplement that. And that's kind of how it has to be.
Yeah. So on the contrary, as you mentioned, we work with a combine. You work with the combine athletes getting ready. These young kids ready to get into the NFL. Really moldable young athletes. But on the contrary, you also work with some older athletes. Not many people know this, but you train the Undertaker here in Austin.
I do.
And he's going on, he's like, 50
years old right now.
He's 50 years old, and he's still wrestling. Still looks great. Is that the oldest athlete you've ever trained? And is how much of a challenge has that been for you?
Going back to the very beginning of the podcast, if you're asking me, is that the oldest athlete I trained? I trained a guy when we were in New Jersey that was actually almost 70 years old, and he was a former basketball player that just wanted to stay athletic. So the Undertaker is not on paper the oldest guy I've trained, but he's currently the oldest guy that I'm training. Yeah. So he's certainly an interesting project, because we haven't been working together like super long. I mean, it's been really just this year. But he's a guy that has really gone through some shit. I mean, he's been wrestling, for 25 years now. And it's just something where you have to really take into consideration the beating that he's taken. And he's definitely got a lot of nicks and bruises throughout those 25 years. He's had he's had a lot of different surgeries throughout all the years. And with a guy like him, it starts with something that I learned from Andrea Spina, who runs the functional range conditioning certification that we had here at the Onnit Academy not too long ago, where he's talking about trying to make sure that every joint in your body is working as that joint should work. So with a guy like The Undertaker, that's where it starts, is making sure that based upon all of the stuff he's gone through in his career and how beat up he's gotten, I need to make sure his shoulder works like a shoulder, his hip works like a hip, his ankle works like an ankle, and so on and so forth. So on top of that, he's the type of a guy that he'll come in and he just wants to get after it. I mean, he's like almost like your perfect athlete, if you will. Like we talk about guys that we have to slow down. Even at 50 years old, he's still that guy. He wants to get in and say, I'm going to warm up for like 5 minutes and let's get after it. It's like, no, okay, well, let's take a time out here. Yeah. Let's really warm up, make sure that your body's functioning as highly as it can, and then we can get after it and really do whatever we want to do. So, but you want to talk about a guy that's super intrinsically motivated. That's him 100%. I mean, he once he steps foot in the gym, he's ready to go. And he'll joke around and say, I almost didn't show up today and stuff like that. But no, he's always kidding around. He's very intrinsically motivated and really just loves to get to work. And he's an interesting guy because you have to know what you can or can't do, but you still have to capitalize on what he's capable of doing and what he loves to do, which is just get after it. So
how is training him? Obviously, when you're training the combine guys, you're training them for those specific tasks of the combine. How do you train a pro WWE wrestler? Like, what kind of movements are you doing?
Well, you have to, like any other athlete, you have to assess what they're going to be doing on the field of play. So in his case,
how do you train for the Chokeslam?
How do you train for the Chokeslam? Well, so when they're in the ring, right, these wrestlers, a lot of what they're doing is a lot of power development. So, and it's also a lot of strength. They got to be able to, despite what anybody's opinion about what it is that they have to lift people over their head. They have to lift them in awkward positions. That's a fact. It's just the way it is. And they have to throw these people. And a guy like him, because he's more of a bigger guy, people want to see him wrestle other big guys. Yeah. So he's got to be capable of lifting guys just as big, if not bigger than him. And so you have to train him to be very, very strong. And you have to train him to be very, very powerful. So from a movement standpoint, we're still taking a global movement approach. Mm-hmm. So we're doing everything that we can. We're trying to make sure he can hinge properly, squat properly, do things like that. But then when we overload him, we're trying to make sure that we can overload him in positions that are safe for what he's able to handle, and at the same time, what is able to develop what he needs to do in the ring. So it's definitely a challenge, but it's something that is fun for me to do because I like being able to provide people with a roadmap that leads them to getting onto the field or into the ring or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. And obviously you can't really train to get being thrown around by Brock Lesnar.
Yeah, that's something that's, you just got to mentally kind of take that and for what it is and just hope for the best as you're flying through the air. So
yeah. So obviously you train all these athletes, but you're in great shape. I'm not trying to say anything.
I try to be.
Yeah, you look good, man.
Thank you.
You look good. So as a coach, what do you do? Because you're not out there, you don't have games to play. Mm-hmm. You're not wrestling Brock Lesnar. What do you do as a coach to stay in form and in shape?
Well, the fun part for me as a coach, and this is something that I've always believed in ever since I started becoming a coach, was that I want to be able to do everything that I'm trying to ask my athletes to do. So I don't want to be able to ask them to do something that I cannot demonstrate. So for me, it becomes a challenge to stay almost game ready at all times, where I have to be able to demonstrate these movements, because a lot of what I do is I like to get very creative with different types of sprints, different types of jumps and things like that. So for me to just ask an athlete to do something without demonstrating it, they might just look at me and say, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. So for me, I need to make sure that I'm in as best shape as I can be, so that the athletes respect me, because they come in and they say, he looks like he's been in the trenches. He looks like he kind of at least has somewhat of an idea of what we're going through. And B, that's exactly what I want, is I want to be able to know exactly what they're going through, because if I know what they're going through, then it's so much easier to coach it at that point, because I've been there in the trenches, so to speak. So for me to say, like, hey, I want you to move more like this. And there's some things that I find myself explaining, and I don't know where it comes from, but I know that it doesn't come from a book. It comes from me just having done the movement and feeling a certain something that I can then portray onto them. So for me, it's just, I try to do everything that I ask my athletes to do. And that's just in every time I write a program, I test it on myself before I test it on anybody else. Yeah. So, I never give anybody anything that I've never done personally. And that's something that I try to live by, and I'm going to do as long as I can possibly do it.
All right. I'm going to name off some movements, and you tell me your favorite, or in your opinion, the best exercise to improve that movement.
Okay.
All right. Takeoff speed.
Takeoff speed. Wow. I mean, the right answer, which is my answer, is that there's so much you can do.
I know you're going to say that. I was trying to just get one thing out of you.
So
pick one of them.
All right. One rudimentary exercise we used in terms of quote unquote takeoff speed and sprinting, I'm assuming you're talking about, right? Like just exploding off the line.
Exploding off the line, yeah.
So one of the things we like to use a lot is what's called a med ball throw start. So what we do is we'll have our athletes hold a med ball, usually only about a 10-pound med ball. We don't go much heavier than that. And they're in a 2-point stance, standing upright. And when they need to dip down as fast as they can, explode forward as fast as they can. And what they do is they fully extend and throw that med ball. And then what they then have to do is chase after that med ball. So you're looking for two things in that exercise. The first thing you're looking for is a super explosive start. So I tell them that they should be able to explode enough in that start that ball is going to keep rolling for 20, 30 yards. Like you want to keep that ball going. And the other thing is you want to launch that ball in the direction that you're sprinting. So differently from a throw where you're just throwing as far as you can, you want that nice arc. For this exercise, you want to explode in the direction that you're sprinting. And if you get it right, it feels like you're exploding out of a cannon. And then at that point, once you've fully extended and released that ball, you have to catch yourself and start moving your arms and legs before you completely face plant on the ground. So it's a great way to really explode into that start and then try to make it a smooth transition from that throw into a sprint, at which point you can accelerate and it just goes into regular sprint mechanics. But that's a really awesome, like very introductory exercise that we use for takeoff speed.
Okay. Pushing and pulling strength.
pushing and pulling strength.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, one or the other.
You could do a bench press for pushing, or you could do some type of.
Try to get more creative.
Well, one of the things that we definitely like using.
Trying to give somebody new, some new exercises to use.
Something that Joe's always been big on is using the bands and chains with the barbell lifts and what's referred to as accommodating resistance, because when you're using bands and chains, the lightest portion of that lift is when it's the bar is on your chest if you're doing a bench press, right? So at the bottom, it's as light as it's going to be, but as you're pressing, the chains unravel or the band stretches, at which point the resistance gets heavier as you're pressing through the motion. So if you didn't have these bands and chains on the bar, you would reach a point at which your body biomechanics would reach a point of advantage, at which point it's easy for you to just lock the bar out, right? But if you have chains and bands on the bar, it becomes progressively harder as you're trying to lock out that bench press, because the resistance continues to climb the more you lock it out. So that's something that has always kind of been a staple in our programs, is using accommodated resistance in terms of developing that pushing strength, if you will. And then pulling strength is just, I'm a huge fan of doing gymnastic type movements for pulling. I love doing pull-up variations, chin-up variations, any type of inverted row variations, things like that, where athletes are completely able to control their own body in different types of pulling movements and in different types of positions from a quote-unquote pulling standpoint.
Okay. One of my favorite things from some of the DeFranco's programs I've attempted are like the finishers at the end. What's your favorite finisher to use?
My favorite finisher? I hate all of them. So
everybody hates them, but they feel good when you finish.
Yeah. Well, that's a tough one, man. I think just the classic barbell complex that he wrote back in Built Like a Badass.
I love that complex.
That's just something that's very simple, but it still sucks. So
yeah.
I think that's just a great
the
complex.
First time I ever did that, I was gonna die.
Oh yeah,
I felt like I was gonna die, but like once you're done, you just feel like so pumped and gigantic. It's like the greatest feeling in the world.
Yeah, it's just one of those full body, challenges from a strength and just endurance standpoint, as well as just being able to mentally handle it. So yeah, it's definitely a classic and an oldie but a goodie, if you will.
Cool. So people that are listening, obviously, like you said, everybody's gonna have a different plan, a different goal. Is there any type of wireframe that people can use to kind of figure stuff out?
Wireframe?
Like some just kind of like some like general guideline on getting started, like of training like an athlete, because some people
training like an athlete,
kind of how to set a regimen, basically is what I'm asking.
Well, when you look at an athlete, one of the things to think about is that they don't just lift weights. So if you're looking to really train to be athletic, you can't
just go run all the time.
You can't just run. You can't just lift. You can't just do plyometrics, or
you can't just do the barbell complex finisher.
Yeah, you can't only do that. That's something that has to be very strategically placed and have a reason for being there. So yeah, it's what you have to do is you have to understand that the term fitness is very broad, and it's something that encompasses so many different disciplines. So athletes need to be very fast. You have to do speed training. You have to be very powerful, meaning very explosive. So they have to be able to jump really high, jump really far, and throw somebody to the ground. So that's power development right there. So that's the combination of strength and speed. And then they also have to be very strong. But on top of that, they have to have what's referred to as energy system capacity, where they have to, what's commonly referred to as conditioning, which is a very broad term as well. But they have to be able to sustain efforts throughout the course of a game. So they have to be very much in shape from a capacity standpoint as well. And then on top of all that, they need to be able to get themselves into position. So they have to be mobile. So they have to treat mobility not as just like something that's extra. They have to treat that as part of the entire training process and take it very seriously as a training program within itself. So if you're looking to become quote unquote athletic, what falls into it is trying to elevate what's called your motor potential. So you're trying to improve your overall potential for anything that is a human movement oriented type of thing. So strength, speed, power, endurance, flexibility, mobility, durability, that all ties into it. So you can't just lift weights and expect to be athletic. I just saw a video the other day.
Are you talking about before you mentioned it, are you talking about the one where like the bodybuilders
yes,
try to sprint?
Exactly. The bodybuilder versus the athlete.
Yeah.
So
that's what brought me like, hey, we should do a podcast about training like an athlete, because I was thinking about like those bodybuilders. Like, I'm probably way more athletic than any of those really jacked dudes.
Of course.
Like,
yeah,
it's crazy.
So that's what it is. It's like, you just lift weights all the time. You're only getting good at lifting weights. Yeah. Just like if you're only sprinting in one direction all the time, you're only getting good at sprinting straight or whatever it is. So you have to, it is a complex approach to training athletes. So the challenge for sports performance specialists or strength coaches is trying to take the complexity of training a human for very complex tasks and finding ways to simplify that. So you have to already accept the fact that it's complex, but you just can't make it more complex than it needs to be. So you have to try to make it as simple as you can while understanding the complexity of what goes into it.
Yeah.
So that
and not to shit on bodybuilding, but like, is there any advantage to having all those muscles besides being able just to push weight?
I mean, bodybuilding type muscle, that's just that's,
is that even healthy?
That's the quote unquote sport within itself, is just being able to be as jacked as you can. So no, there's no, I mean, like for somebody like a football player or something like that, you don't have to be as jacked as a pro bodybuilder. You just have to have enough muscle to be able to fuel the efforts that you're going to be doing in your athletic activities.
It could slow you down.
Oh yeah. Well, if like if you,
obviously the video.
Yeah, if you're only focusing on lifting and you're never focusing on developing movement patterns, you're going to run very bad, like that guy did in the video, and then you're going to pull a hamstring.
Out of breath when you go up a flight of stairs.
Yeah, and it's like there's a lot of people that are advocates of training super slow all the time, which there is certainly a huge place for that, like very controlled movement when you're in the weight room or doing body weight movements and things like that, but they never train to be explosive. So I love the controlled movement standpoint of stuff, and I think it's definitely got a huge foundational role in the whole process. But if you never train to be explosive and you decide, hey, I'm gonna go play flag football one day at the park, and you try to cover some guy that's pretty fast, you're going to pull a muscle or something might happen. You might tweak because your body is not used to operating at that high of a level. So you have to really train. Like I said, your body has to be prepped for as much stuff as you can. And when we're training our athletes, we're putting them in a lot of different movement combinations. And sometimes we're strategically putting them in awkward positions when we're doing our durability and mobility stuff. We're putting them in what would look like compromised positions sometimes, but they're only using their body weight for that. We're not loading them with that. And that's just to get their bodies used to, because you don't know on the field. If I'm a running back and I'm going to get hit by somebody and my ankle twists a weird way and it's never been used to being in that position, it might injure and something might happen. So we're trying to get them used to as much of a global movement system as we can. And then it's, not just about movement. You have to make sure that you're also providing them with the proper stimulus to develop all of what's called motor abilities of strength, speed, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's nutrition and all that other stuff, which we'll have to leave out for another time. As we know, everything's made in the kitchen, right? That's what they say.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely important to educate yourself on nutrition. And
well, that's all great information. And man, I'm kind of jacked. I kind of want to go work out.
You're jacked, or you're gonna try to become
jacked? I'm
jacked
to work out.
You're jacked up to
jacked
work
to
out.
be jacked. We'll have to see how that works out. Well, thanks, Cameron. Anybody that's happens to be listening to this podcast that's a college athlete looking to go to the combine, we're still taking signups for that combine.
Of course, yeah.
You can go to onnitacademygym.com/combine.
Yep, that's
got it right.
Exactly right.
Perfect. You can go there and find out more information. Or if you're coming by Austin, you can work out with Cameron. He does personal training too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
not just athletes. We train everybody for that.
Everybody. He'll even train my weak ass. So until next time, thanks for listening to the podcast. We hope to do some more. We should be back on schedule here soon. Until next time, take it easy, everyone. Thanks.